Radio Caroline and Radio London came along. They brought rock music to millions of teenagers for the first time, until they were banned when Radio 1 was created. Well, today they're back, albeit for a short stint, to mark the 30th anniversary of that day. Here's Ian Glover-James.
Pop pickers, it's Pick of the Pops.
Once pop radio was like this, only on the old BBC Light programme just twice a week. Britain's teenagers living through the swinging 60s were starved of chances to hear it. Their only escape was the scratchy sound of Radio Luxembourg. Then it all changed. The Pirates were launched. Suddenly, Britain went transistor radio mad. By the mid-60s, pop poured from the airwaves 24 hours a day. A new culture was born that changed the face of broadcasting. The new music was broadcast from ships 3.5 miles off Britain, the so-called radio pirates, moored in international waters to escape British broadcasting laws. In the 60s, young DJs launched entire careers from the pirates.
Well, they were very important because they did away with the BBC monopoly in this country, and they brought about popular music 24 hours a day on British radio. I mean, up until then, we only had the BBC Light programme, the Northern Dance Orchestra, and we had Radio Luxembourg fading in and out in the evenings. So without the pirate ships, it wouldn't have happened, I don't think.
Now the 60s pirates will be heard again. They're to get a special 28-day licence to broadcast the sound that brought Britain into the pop era, until they were closed down 30 years ago today to make way for the BBC's new Radio 1. Ian Glover-James, ITN.
And another veteran.
On now to another anniversary. It's 30 years since the government first tried to close down the world's most famous pirate radio station. Radio Caroline defied the authorities and delighted its fans in the 60s by broadcasting pop music 24 hours a day from a ship in the North Sea. Well, today the old pirate is broadcasting again to mark the anniversary and preparing to launch itself on the internet.
Rockin' Europe from the North Sea. This is Radio Caroline.
In the 1960s, Radio Caroline set the standard for pop music radio. The 1997 version aboard the former Icelandic trawler the Ross Revenge is moored in the Medway at Queenborough in Kent.
This is Caroline 1278 on the medium wave band. Massive.
And this time Caroline is broadcasting legally. It's been granted a special licence to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the 1967 Marine Offences Broadcasting Act. That law made it illegal to resupply a pirate radio ship from Britain. The other 1960s pirates gave in, but Caroline carried on broadcasting until it was silenced by crippling debts in 1968, only to re-emerge 4 years later.
It was outside of the law, and people all like that. It was, to a degree, the underdog, and the British always identify with the underdog. It provided very good entertainment, and it didn't do any harm. And, of course, there was the adventure of being on a ship in the middle of the ocean. So it has all these elements of adventure, which people like.
Radio Caroline was the first radio station to broadcast pop music 24 hours a day. Its success led the BBC to launch Radio 1, hiring many staff from the pirate in the process.
You wouldn't have The Who, the Rolling Stones wouldn't have become as successful as they did. You wouldn't have had Richard Branson made his initial money out of Radio Caroline with a company called Caroline Imports. There was Chris Blackwell and Island Records. All these things happened out of Radio Caroline. It made it possible for the young entrepreneur to create a business for himself.
Radio Caroline's backers now hope to raise sufficient funds so that Caroline can broadcast permanently again, this time via the internet and satellite. In the meantime, its disc jockeys and fans will have to make do with its periodic appearances around the British coast. Charles Rhodes, BBC News, Kent.
You're too young to remember that, aren't you?
Of course I am.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Yeah. Here's Suzanne with the weather.
Thanks. Fairly good if you're bobbing about on boats today. Quite light breezes around the country and around the Mediterranean too. The satellite picture.
Also in the next hour, why Radio Caroline is back on the air 30 years after pirate stations were closed down.
And Suzanne Charlton's here with this morning's weather. Suzanne.
Thank you. A lot of fine.
The pirates.
Well, they were very important because they did away with the BBC monopoly in this country, and they brought about popular music 24 hours a day on British radio.
Now the pop pirates have a short-term licence to play the 60s sounds again to mark an era that ended 30 years ago today. Ian Glover-James, ITN.
On News at 10, more.
Is being sued by a Californian model who claims he was engaged to her until last week. And finally, two of the radio stations which introduced a whole generation of 40 and 50-somethings to popular music are back on the air for a month. Ian Glover James went down memory lane.
Radio Caroline, 1278 AM. It's 26 minutes after 3. This is Rob Harrison.
Yes, it's that Radio Caroline, the pirate pop ship of the 1960s, granted a temporary licence again to mark 30 years since the pirate broadcasters were closed down. Keith Skues was one of the young DJs on the Pirates in the 1960s.
And a very good Thursday evening to you from yours truly, Cardboard Shoes, Keith Skues.
Tonight he recalled the Pirates' importance.
Teenagers and youngsters were not being looked after musically, so the Pirates were set up, and there was a need for this kind of radio. They were pulling in audiences of nearly 20 million.
The DJs know the ship started something.
Well, they were very important because they did away with the BBC monopoly in this country, and they brought about popular music 24 hours a day on British radio. I mean, up until then, we only had the BBC Light programme, the Northern Dance Orchestra, and we had Radio Luxembourg fading in and out in the evenings.
The Pirates gave Britain transistor radio fever, but 30 years ago today, the government closed them down for breaching broadcasting rules. Ian Glover James, News at 10.
That's it tonight. We're back tomorrow. From all of